What's up, everyone? I want to thank you for checking out episode number 2 of Somm Sounds. Today we're going to be talking about structure in wine, and more specifically acid, tannin, and alcohol. So when talking about a wine structure, I like to use the metaphor for building a house. I feel like there are a lot of similarities and it gives you a good visual representation. It's really fun to talk about the small details of a house. It's fun to talk about the walk-in closet. It's fun to talk about the types of oak used in the cabinets. However, none of those things would exist without a solid structure and a solid foundation. The same exact example is true for wine as well. It's really fun to talk about what interesting notes you get on the nose and how the palate differs, but at the end of the day, if you don't have structure, if you don't have nice acid, if you don't have well-integrated tannins, none of those things really matter because the wine is just not going to be that enjoyable. Acidity in wine is basically just the wine's pH, and the higher it is, it's typically viewed as a more positive thing. It can help balance out a wine's sweetness or tannin level, and generally helps to cut through fatty food as well. Acidity actually starts while the grape is still in the vineyard. It can get it from the soil from potassium, but in many cases, in all cases really, it starts as the grape is ripening. So the grapes start off being very, very acidic and tend to lose acidity over time. This is why it's so important to have a cooling influence on your wine. A cooler temperature helps preserve acid. So as you start to study the world of wine, you will soon discover that virtually all high-end vineyard sites have a close proximity to large bodies of water, have higher elevations to get cooler temperatures, or have some sort of cooling influence, even if it's just a nighttime cooling air influence, and that helps preserve acidity in wine. Before we move on, I want to talk about blind tasting acidity in wine. There's actually one simple trick that is extraordinarily helpful, and that is after you take a sip of wine, you should let your jaw hang for a moment. If your glands fill up with saliva very quickly and heavily, that means that the wine is higher acid. Tannin is a molecule that's found in dark chocolate, grape skins, tea leaves, many things, and it binds to proteins in your mouth in this case, and it creates an astringency effect where it feels like it's wicking away the moisture in your mouth. Because red wine is fermented with the grape skins, those tannins that are naturally occurring in the skins actually get transferred to the wine itself, and that's where tannin comes from. Different varietals or different grapes have different naturally occurring levels of tannin. Wines like Pinot Noir and Gamay have very low levels of tannin in the skins, and wines like Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Syrah, Tannat have very high levels. Tannin is relatively easy to detect in wine as well. If you swish the wine around in your mouth, as you do with mouthwash before you spit or swallow, the tannins in the wine will start to grip to the proteins in your gum and will start to wick away that moisture. This is why high tannin wine is often paired with red meat. So the tannin in the wine actually binds to the proteins in the meat, such as steak, instead of your gums and saliva, so that the compounds come together and actually form a more complex flavor in your mouth than would normally occur. Just like wines that are high acid tend to come from cooler climates, wines that are high in alcohol tend to come from warmer climates. This is because the additional heat and sunlight helps the vine and the grapes particularly produce more sugar. So because there's more sugar, there's actually more food for the yeast to eat, and in turn they produce more alcohol. When blind tasting, you can detect the amount of alcohol in a wine by swallowing a little bit and then exhaling. The amount of heat that you feel as it exhales through your body will determine the amount of alcohol. Just like bourbon and other spirits, a wine can be described as hot if the alcohol seems a little high and out of balance. Before we conclude the video, I wanted to touch base on the musical aspect of this real quick. The three things that we talked about today, acid, tannin, and alcohol, really remind me of a 3-band EQ. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's an EQ treble, mid, and bass, probably similar to the ones that you have in your car stereo. Too much treble, just like too much acid, can put a wine out of balance. However, too little treble or too little acid can be almost worse. Not enough treble in a song makes the song feel flabby and missing that high end that you would expect out of it, just like wine. Too little acid just makes the wine kind of fall flat and just be uninteresting. It doesn't have that backbone, it doesn't have that high-end brightness that you would expect. Tannins are very comparable to the mid or mid-range EQ in a song, in a sense that there are occasions where they can be bumped up and there are occasions where they can be scooped down. It really depends on the stylistic direction of the song and the winemaking style. Bass and alcohol are very similar in a sense that they can be easily overdone and have to make sure that they remain in balance. In fact, in bass-heavy music, you will often find it coupled with very equally high-end treble, just as very alcohol-heavy wines, you'll hopefully find that they are balanced by a lot of high acidity. As always, thank you for checking out my video today. If you enjoyed yourself, give us a like or a subscribe. And if you have any questions or want to give some suggestions for future videos, go ahead and leave those in the comments below. Cheers!